Okay, excellent, guys. Thank you. Yes, apologies for the delay. And I think we are ready to start. Yes, so good morning once again to everybody, and welcome to our webinar on writing. So writing is a very broad concept, which is why we decided to focus specifically on the common problems that you might have when teaching writing to your students, or that your students might have on their own. So what we'll be doing here, we will be discussing tips, tricks, and strategies to help your students write better and to enjoy writing. And I would really appreciate your ideas in the course of this webinar. So we will have some pauses when we'll have a chance to share them. So please write your ideas in chat. Any questions that might be extremely important, you can see the questions box. Yeah, it's at the top right-hand corner, so please write those questions in there. And if you have any other questions, we will have 15 minutes at the end of the webinar where I will be hopefully answering all of them, so you can also save them for later if you want to. So most of the people can hear me, I think. If you can't, can you please write to the moderator or just try reloading the page? Yeah, that should also help. If it doesn't, write to Anya, our moderator, please. Okay, so any other questions we will be discussing in the end here, so please don't forget those. Right, okay, let's get started. And okay, we should see the new slide. Right, guys. So I'm sure that when you were teaching writing, you've encountered different problems with your students. And before we begin, it would actually be very interesting for us to hear what sort of problems you might have encountered. So could you please just choose one from your experience and write it into chat? Any problems that you might have had when teaching writing to your students? Okay. Please think. Yeah, I'm sure if you're here, that means, okay, different, teaching them different styles of writing. Okay, thank you, Oksana. Right. Motivation, definitely. Prepositions, yeah, that's kind of grammar, but definitely, yeah, we especially see it in writing. Okay. What about the other participants? What problems have you encountered? Writing block, yeah, that's a universal one. Punctuation, definitely, and I think not just in English, yeah. Usage of tenses, yeah, definitely lots of grammar issues. Handwriting, absolutely, yeah. Okay, writing letter, yes, the different types of writing. They try to avoid writing, lack of interest, lack of ideas. Excellent. Okay, well, we have quite a list, and we're going to try and address all of these issues, hopefully, in the course of our webinar. Okay, and the most common problem, and some of you have already mentioned it, is that students have a lack of interest when it comes to writing. So they seem to enjoy writing much less than speaking, than reading and listening. And why do you think that is? Why is writing the least popular skill? Let's have some ideas in chat. Why do they enjoy writing so much less? Can't write in general, yeah? No feedback? It's boring for them, yeah, excellent, yeah. Takes too much time, absolutely. Speaking's much faster. They're lazy, yeah, could be, yeah. It's difficult, yeah, requires an effort. Yes, sometimes they might not be sure what the teacher wants them to write. Excellent, guys. Thank you very much for those ideas. You are absolutely right. And what I have found in my teaching experience is that usually students are not invested in writing because we as teachers don't invest in it enough. And what I mean is that often a teacher would spend a lesson working on speaking, on listening, sometimes on reading. And then at the very end of the lesson, you tell your student, okay, and for homework, I would like you to write an essay. So what happens in this situation is the teacher is skipping an essential stage of the writing task, which is called pre-writing. And this stage is aimed at raising your students' interest in the task, at activating their knowledge of the topic, which might help them to write later, at brainstorming ideas. And also you as a teacher during the pre-writing task, you have the chance to give your student necessary tools to do it. For example, vocabulary that they could use or structures. So in fact, pre-writing is a crucial stage. Before you give the writing task, it is very important to talk it through with the student, because this you will see will make them in the long run more motivated to complete the task, because you've dedicated part of the lesson to it, and it will help them to produce better work, because you can, as I've said, hand them the tools to do it. So tip number 1, discuss the writing task and spend some time preparing for it during the lesson. Don't just give it to your student at the very end for homework. My second tip is that students are usually more invested in the task if it suits either their needs or interests. So if we set them some general essays from a list that we have, without thinking what topics they might need or what topics might be interesting, then the student will not really invest in the task and perhaps not be very interested in it. So with adult ESL students, it's actually quite easy because to choose the topic, because they mostly need to learn to write letters, emails, or even faxes in English, and they need to do it in a business context. So as a teacher, you sort of know which direction to go in. With teens, they would be more interested in contacting peers from English-speaking countries on the internet. So, for instance, working on business emails wouldn't really make much sense for them. And with children, if you're teaching writing to children, so children don't really have usually a general long-term reason to write, but they can relate to the task if it's fun, or if you will reward them somehow at the end of it with a writing sticker, for instance. So you can find a way to engage them as well. So tip number 2, find the kind of tasks that will be either useful or interesting to your students. Okay, and then as with any part of writing, on the other hand, you need to spice things up occasionally. So if you are always giving your student the same type of writing task, they will eventually grow bored. For instance, if your student is always writing business emails, even though they're useful, they will eventually get tired of doing the same thing. So once in a while, instead of setting them another business email or another essay, you could have them write a film review or a short story, and where possible, you should sort of give them experience in different kinds of writing, not just the one that they specialize in. Okay, and the third thing is, this is again where possible, but try to develop your students' writing by setting them inspiring topics. So what I prefer using for this are writing prompts. You can just find them on the internet. There are plenty. And these are usually interesting questions, such as, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And then, students are usually more inspired to write essays about these kind of things. So that's the fourth point here. Give them really interesting, really catchy topics to write. And finally, it's a good idea to use technology to your advantage. So you could try replacing traditional writing tasks, with a more 21st century version. So this to make them seem more interesting and practical. So instead of telling them to write a letter, they could obviously write you an email. Another great way of developing writing is keeping a journal, but again, your student might be more interested and motivated if you offer them to keep an online blog. Instead of setting them another for and against essay, you could offer them to participate for a change in an online forum or a discussion platform. And when it comes to story writing, again, you can engage technology. So there is, for instance, a great platform. Let me just move to the next slide, called Storyboard. And this is an online publishing platform that allows you to use cool tools when you're writing a story. Or, for instance, your students, they can pair their writing with beautiful art. Yes, so there are basically plenty of ways you can update the tasks to make them essentially practice the same writing skills, but to do it in a more interesting and modern way. Okay. And writing is, many of you have mentioned, another writing problem, which is lack of motivation. And writing is obviously a skill that requires students to be highly motivated. So if they're not involved in the task, if they don't have a reason to write, then this task won't be an effective learning experience. So a broader issue with writing, we talked about lack of interest, but more broad than this is lack of motivation. And basically the thing to do here is to think, why students not motivated to write? So we already discussed that they might not be interested in the task, they might find it boring, but what could be some other reasons that they are not motivated? Let's have some ideas in chat. Why don't they have the motivation? They know they need to do this, but okay, no practical application. Excellent. Thank you, Lena. Yeah, no need for writing in their usual life. Lack of urgency, yeah, especially if you're taking private English lessons, much more lenient, relaxed. Okay. Excellent, guys. Yeah, all of you are absolutely right. In fact, there are different reasons, for each student why they're not motivated to write, and it's always a good idea to ask your student about their previous writing experience and how they feel about it. So one of the major problems that I found with my students is that they have negative past experiences when it comes to writing. So this might include previous teachers who over-focused on correctness and they didn't really pay attention to what the student wanted to say with their essay or letter. And then after years of getting your work back crossed with red ink, the students, they get discouraged with writing. And what we can do in this case, if your student had this negative past experience, is to show them that they are also not just interested in the grammar and punctuation, they are also interested in what they have to say with their written work that they've handed in. And only after you've discussed the content, is it a good idea to give feedback on mistakes. So I'm not saying that grammar and punctuation is unimportant. They are extremely important, but your students should understand that they are tools for writing, not the purpose of writing. Tip number one, kind of pay more attention to the content or show them that you're interested in the content, in what they're trying to say. Second thing is, we will talk more about correction later on, but what you can do is give 2 pieces of praise for every negative point. So, for instance, you could say that, Maria, your vocabulary is great and you used excellent punctuation in your essay. You need to work more on tenses, on using tenses correctly. So you're giving criticism, but you're also mentioning to the student the things that they did right. And this is showing them that they're on the right path. Because if your correction is just pure criticism and if your student receives a paper full of red marks, it's not really going to encourage most of them to continue writing. So definitely give some praise and comment on the good points, not just the mistakes that they've made. Thirdly, this is again related to the over-focus on correctness. Sometimes the students, because of this, they don't see the larger picture, the purpose of writing. And as some of you have mentioned, they see writing as a pointless exercise, something that you do only in school, and something that has no relation to real life. So your students should have a more specific reason to write than just the general, I need to improve my English. And it's quite easy to find this specific reason with business students because, as we've said, they need to learn how to write emails and texts. With teens and young learners, though, if you're teaching them, you need to sell them the importance of good writing skills. So you could discuss with them the power of writing, tell them that writing has inspired love, that it has righted social ills, that it moved people to revolution. And you should emphasize that it's an act of communication. So you can talk about the many things you can do with writing. You can contest a bill, you can express love, you can critique a movie, you can create stories and song lyrics. So things that they see and use every day in their lives. Yeah. So sort of lecture them a little bit and prove to them that writing does have a practical application, and they need to see the functions of writing beyond getting the grade for it. And finally, students, as any other writers, they need to feel that their writing is not occurring in a vacuum, so that somebody's reading and responding to it. Otherwise, why do it? So it's important for them to see that their efforts are validated and that their ideas are understood, which is why, again, before you show them the corrected task, discuss the content of what they wrote. Tell them what you liked. You can ask them additional questions. You can even disagree or debate on some of the ideas, but always show an interest in the content. Don't just go straight into discussing punctuation and tenses that they've used wrongly. Okay, now then, we've talked about lack of interest, lack of motivation, but then again, there are students who do seem quite motivated. You've given them an interesting task, you've talked about their experiences, so on, but then when you do give them this task, they just sit over a blank page. They don't know where to start and how to go beyond a few sentences. So as one of our participants has mentioned, writer's block, which doesn't just happen with English students. So what do you think? How do you as a teacher can help your student to find ideas and make sure that they produce a decent sized piece of writing? Let's see if we can have some ideas in chat. Where to find ideas, essentially. Okay. Yeah, so have a discussion, then write. Excellent. Yeah, so use the pre-writing stage. Do some brainstorming together. Excellent. Yeah, pre-writing stage. What about, for instance, if your student is taking an exam? Yeah, you're not there to do brainstorming with them. How can you teach them to find ideas? Yeah, they should read more. Excellent. I agree, Irina. Yeah, right. What we're talking about, use personal experiences. Oksana thinks these are general ideas. We'll talk about more practical ideas in a second, but still, I think it's important for us to share. Use examples from shows, films, interviews, games. Excellent, Katerina. Yeah, brainstorming, absolutely. Background knowledge. Yeah. So I can't disagree with any of the ideas that you've said. A couple more tips. So we already talked about the importance of the pre-writing stage, which you can use to nudge your students in the right direction. Yeah, so it's definitely a good idea if you are there. Yeah, if you discuss the writing task during the lesson, to have a discussion, to have a debate on the topic of the assignment, and this will serve the double purpose of raising your students' interest. Yeah, as we've talked before, but also it will give them ideas what to write about. And you can further prompt the discussion or the debate if it's not going very well by preparing relevant pictures, photographs. You can think of some controversial questions to ask them, and in most cases this will give them quite a lot of material to write about. So the first thing, have a discussion, use some pictures, questions, and any kind of aids, and materials you can use to help you. Now then, in most cases, you can also ask the student, what experience do you have related to this topic? If they say, I don't have any, you can push them a little bit. Are you sure? If this doesn't concern you, perhaps you know somebody who does. So you will find if you push your student long enough, they're bound to come up with something, yeah, just to get you off their back. So personal experience, definitely. You can also teach them some brainstorming strategies, and these they can use on their own. So the first strategy, it's called journalistic question. And what you do here is you start by reviewing all the question words: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then for the topic that you have, you write a question with each of these question words. So for example, if the topic of your written task is eating habits, then you might get your students to write the question, what are good eating habits? Who in your family has good eating habits? How do we benefit from good eating habits? Where do people with good eating habits eat? When do they eat? And well, there's an infinite number of questions that you can ask on any subject. So once you've come up with these questions, have the student jot down their answers to them, and then go back, read, and organize. And what they will find once they've answered all these questions is that they actually have enough material for a decent-sized piece of work. So that's a strategy that they could use. You can also have them do research. Yeah, so just tell them to look for interesting articles, videos, interviews, or facts, anything that they can include in their written work. And this is also a good opportunity to practice such an important skill as paraphrasing. So they can do that. And finally, this is a favorite strategy with my students. You could suggest to them to discuss the topic with a family or a friend. Because, as we know, learning greatly benefits from peer work and exchange of ideas, and especially if you're teaching your student one-to-one, they will really enjoy this opportunity to sort of have somebody else in the learning process. So have them kind of talk it through with someone else other than you before they write. Okay, so these are kind of ways to find ideas. And and this is an interesting one, so the most common excuse that students have for not completing the task, they will never tell the teacher, I'm not motivated or I'm not interested, but the excuse that we hear most often is, I don't have time. And if you have such students who don't hand in their work because they're extremely busy, yeah, how do you deal with them? Okay, let's have some ideas in chat. What to do if your student never has time to write? Give it for homework, yeah, that's what usually happens, but they don't hand it in. Try to do more in class. Okay, so have them write a bit in class. Yeah, that could be an option. Okay, anything else? Exams, okay, yeah, scare them with exams, okay. Give short writing assignments, excellent, Alexandra, yeah. At least have them do something. Okay, right, yeah. All of these, I see everyone has some experience in dealing with busy students. So what I tend to do is I deal with this excuse by scheduling regular writing assignments. So this can be once a week, once a month. It can be at the end of a unit. But even if your student keeps telling you, I don't have time, still keep scheduling those assignments. Just make sure they're assigned at irregular intervals and that the student knows when to expect the writing assignment. So soon they will learn that, for instance, every month they have to do a writing assignment, or every week. Gradually they will get too ashamed yet to always give the same excuse. And if they know when to expect this assignment, then they will hopefully make time for it. So that is the advice that I have in this situation. Make sure they know when to expect the assignment, and make sure that they know it's regular, yeah, that you're not just going to give up if they've not handed it in for a couple of times. Okay, and now we also have, this is an interesting issue with writing and beginners. So when teaching beginners, you may find that they're not quite ready for standard writing class assignments, because students who are just beginning their English studies, they don't really have the tools to write a 5-paragraph essay. But then again, what some teachers do is they eliminate writing assignments, but it doesn't really help the beginner students in the long run because they do need to start writing at some point. So for beginner students, I would say that short writing assignments are best. Because when they can write even a few sentences that serve a practical purpose, they will see progress, yeah, and they will also see practical applications of their knowledge. So we're going to have a look at some writing tasks that are suitable even for beginners. Okay, and the first of these is a one paragraph task. And what you do is, instead of asking a student to write 5 paragraphs about the topic, you just ask them to do 5 sentences about, and this should be a topic that you've already studied in class, such as could be hobbies, shopping, food, and they will find a task this size much less overwhelming than if you set them a proper essay. And at the same time, even if it's 5 sentences, they're still practicing writing. So that's the first thing you can do. The second really good task is postcards, because for many students, studying English means traveling overseas, and they can share their experiences with a simple postcard written in English. For those, for instance, if they're just starting out, it might be hard to write a postcard on yourself. So what you can do is you can provide them with a formula that they can fill in. So, dear, then they fill in the name. I am, they fill in where they are. Then we're having a great time. Yesterday we, and then they can write what they did yesterday. Then on Monday, and then they write what they will do in the future and wish you were here. So this is a chance for them to practice past tense, future tense, and at the same time, it's not too overwhelming. So you're giving them some support. Okay, so paragraph, postcard. Third task is, of course, emailing. What you can do is you can email your student one simple question and have them answer it as a part of their homework. So the topic doesn't have to be particularly philosophical or complicated. So just getting a few sentences on the screen, it will be enough for many beginning students. Also, this is a fun one. Whether your students are interested in the dating game or not, they can still practice writing personal ads. And what you can do here is you can first show them some samples from a website such as Craigslist, and sort of discuss with them what kind of information you would put in a personal ad, and then have them write an ad of their own. So here they have a great chance to practice the present simple tense, and they should be able to communicate about how they look, what they like to do in their free time, and what they want in a match. So essentially all the things that they've learned, they will be able to put them into a practical use. So these simple writing assignments, they will be just enough to challenge your beginner students, but at the same time, they are not too overwhelming. And an added bonus here is that they're also practical and they have real life applications. So I tend to see that if I use these 4 tasks with my students, their confidence increases and their motivation increases as a result. So definitely those. Okay, but on the other hand, how do we deal with students who are already intermediate or even more advanced, but they still keep handing you in really simplistic tasks with primitive grammar, primitive vocabulary? So how would you deal with a student like that? Okay, let's have some ideas. So I'll just repeat the question. Okay, add to the task, says Irina. Okay, give 3 topics to choose. Okay, most of them type letters. Yeah, definitely. Give them a specific task. Use past perfect. Excellent, Alexandra. Yeah. Very good. Absolutely. Okay. So just to expand on what you've said, the first thing you can do is work together with your student during the pre-writing stage. and you can create a list of words that they must use in their assignment. So this will turn their attention to using more advanced vocabulary in their work. And you can also give them some structures that you expect them to use. For example, as we just had the idea, you have to use past perfect in 5 sentences. That's definitely a good idea. So tell them what you want them to do. Yeah, be more specific. The second thing is you should emphasize to your student that some words such as nice, good, bad, they're taboo in academic writing and in writing at a more advanced level. So together with your student, you can come up with a list of synonyms that they can use instead of these words, and sort of if they ever use the word nice, good or bad in the future, yeah, make sure that you underline it as a mistake, so it will teach them to try and use more complicated vocabulary. And finally, there are some tasks and exercises which you can do that are targeted specifically at simplistic vocabulary and simplistic writing. So in the first one, you have a very simple story which you can easily prepare yourself. So one day Anna went to visit her father. She took some books and magazines. Her father was very happy to see his daughter. They talked and Anna went home. So you give your student this kind of simplistic story and you ask them to look at it and to add adjectives, adverbs, and any other interesting information, so to expand the story. Another thing that you can do is work on the sentence structure. So again, you give your students some very simplistic sentences. For example, we have here, California has a drought. The drought has gone on for a long time, and we must conserve water. And you ask them to combine these 3 sentences into one to improve the text. So the ideal answer you're expecting should be California's drought has gone on for several years, and the time has come for Californians to conserve water. So once you've done a couple of these, you will see that the sentence structure should improve. Okay. Often, so sometimes students write these simplistic essays just because kind of they can't be bothered, yeah. But usually the reason actually for that is that they're afraid of making mistakes and they're afraid to take risks with the language. So how can we as teachers help them to overcome this? How can we make sure that they are more adventurous with the language and that they try and use more complicated structures? Okay, give them lots of praise. Thank you, Irina. Yeah, mistakes are okay. Encourage them. Yeah, be a cheerleader. Don't correct each mistake. Excellent, Oksana. Yeah, study on our mistake. Yeah, learn from our mistakes. On the spot correction. Okay. Right. Yes, and all of these, again, excellent ideas. The first thing in this case, if you have a student who's very careful with the language, you might need to lecture them a bit on the fact that mistakes are a part of the process. So taking risks, trying out new vocabulary and structures. So all of this is kind of is what makes progress of learning a new language. So, and kind of talk to the student about that. You may also need to adapt your correction methods from correcting everything to focusing on global errors, as we've mentioned in the chat. And this is the academic way of saying pick your battles. So focus your correction on a couple of major problem areas. For instance, if the student is always misusing verb tenses, then that is the mistake to focus rather than talking about the one missing article that they have in their work. And so then again, you have extremely careful students, but you also have those students who make way too many mistakes. They have a very carefree approach to their written tasks, and they submit work full of mistakes that they shouldn't be making at their level. So if you have such carefree students, how do you deal with them? So, for instance, if your intermediate student submitted a horrific piece of writing, No S's. Color code the correction. Says Katrina. Okay, yeah. Good. Anything else we can do with students? Okay. Peer assessment. Excellent. Yes, definitely if you're teaching a group. Okay, ask them to make some more examples. Yeah, make them suffer a little bit. Yeah, don't just gloss over the mistake. Okay, ask them to correct their own mistakes. Excellent, Alexandra. Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. You're taking the words out of my mouth. So personally, I found that with such students, if you tell them check your work before handing it in, it isn't entirely helpful. So instead, what you can do is you can prepare for them a list of errors that they've made. Okay, and in the beginning, 3 should be enough. So for instance, this could be verb tenses, punctuation in questions, and for instance, preposition of. And what you do is you ask them to go through the work and to look for these specific 3 errors. So this will actually make them more attentive, yeah, instead of just looking at the whole piece of writing and trying to find something missing out there. So give them specific mistakes to look for. And finally, this seems to be an issue with most students, that I found you spend quite a lot of time correcting the work, but then you see that they haven't really learned from those corrections. And even if you have discussed the mistakes they made, it doesn't stop them from making those same mistakes in the next essay. And the reason for this is that students, they learn the use of second language through the actual use of it, not discussion. So therefore, you should always review and revise your students' work after correction in order to make any real progress. And what I mean by reviewing and revising are basically these 5 steps that we have here. Okay, and for instance, your student hands you in a piece of writing and you make a copy of it. And what you do with this copy is you underline the mistakes, but only those mistakes that you are sure they can correct by themselves. So these should be mistakes on the topics that you already covered. Once you have underlined these mistakes, not corrected them, you can give them to the student and ask them to correct as many on their own as they can. And you will find that they are actually able to correct most of them once those mistakes have been pointed out, provided that, of course, you've studied the topic with them. After they have corrected what they can, you help them correct the rest and then discuss those mistakes. And finally, once all of this correction is over, you give the student an unmarked copy of the task, and you ask them to go through it and to correct all of the mistakes they've made by themselves. So what will happen here, first of all, because you've already discussed and corrected those mistakes, the student will be able to do them the second time on their own. Secondly, because they're correcting those mistakes for the second time in a row, they will remember, hopefully, the corrections much better. And thirdly, it will give them a sense of confidence. So usually when you see that you made a lot of mistakes, it puts you down, but once you can correct them by yourself, it will encourage them and sort of make them feel proud that they're able to correct and learn from themselves. So this is kind of final thing on correction, and now we actually have time for questions. Yes, if you have any, or any questions that I might have missed in chat, and also feel welcome to share if there is anything, any problems that you had with your student writing, which maybe you know how to solve now. Okay, so please, I'm going to actively transfer to chat now. Okay, any questions or thoughts on how you will perhaps try something new in your writing lessons? Perhaps there are some questions that we could discuss as a group that you might have. Mm-hmm. Okay, and for instance, when teaching writing, are there any books or materials that you prefer to use? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Katerina has a question. If you correct some mistakes in the essay and the rest the student corrects. Okay, what I mean by saying the student needs to correct the original essay. So you have two copies of the written task. One is the copy that you mark and you correct with your student. The second copy is what they wrote. Yeah, it's essentially the same, but it doesn't have any corrections. Especially doesn't have any of your own corrections. So once you've gone through the whole task, once you've discussed all the mistakes, have the student correct their own work again, but without you this time, yeah? Which is why you need to have two copies, essentially the copy that you will correct with your student and the clean copy that they will correct themselves, yes? So this is helping them to review. Did I answer your question, Katerina? Was it clear enough? Okay, while we're waiting, Yelena is asking why should letter writing be taught on templates? I'm not saying it should be taught, but it might be a good idea with beginners to start with a couple of templates because, again, this will depend on the writing level of your student. But if they are just starting out, if they don't know how and what to write, yeah, template is giving them additional support. Then once they've written a couple of letters using templates, you can have them writing letters on their own without any support. But this is always a good way to start to make sure they're not overwhelmed. Okay, so something that you can use. Okay, any other questions? Maybe something you had in the beginning of the webinar and we didn't discuss? Yes, what books would I recommend for writing and punctuation? So I would say the Bible of writing, of teaching writing, in my opinion, are the Successful Writing series. So I will send you a link to those materials after the webinar, but I'm just going to write the name. Okay, Successful Writing. Okay, and this is an amazing book. In fact, it's a series of books. They have one book for each level, and it enables the students and you, with your student, to practice different types of writing. There are exercises that are aimed at specific areas of writing. There are lots of examples, so it's a very practical book. It doesn't have a lot of theory. But really a lot of materials and practical tasks to essentially help you improve writing. So definitely the Successful Writing series. Okay, yes, there are exercises with keys there, absolutely. Okay, and I see that some of you have already used them. Irina has used this series, yeah. I'm not sure who the publisher is, so again, I will send you the link to those books, yeah, and you can check out. But I think it's Oxford Press, unless I'm mistaken. Okay, punctuation, how to teach punctuation. Well, there is again the theory that students, again, what they're writing is more important than punctuation. We tend to over focus on it. It's a debate for and against. I essentially believe that you should teach punctuation, and again, the Successful Writing series, they do dedicate sort of chapters and exercises to punctuation. But again, my personal opinion is not to over focus on it. So definitely discuss it with your student, but probably after you've discussed everything else. Yes, so because for instance, or if you're correcting their essay, maybe underline some punctuation mistakes, yeah, but don't kind of make the whole essay covered in red ink. Express Publishing, yes, thank you, Irina. Yeah. Yeah, I see some of you use them, which is amazing. Okay, we have a question from Ksenia. How to come to another paragraph gradually and logically in a letter when you need to ask your friend about something. Okay, you wrote about work in summer. By the way, would you like to Okay, so what I would do here, obviously, you would start a personal letter with some general pleasantries, like how are you doing? Hope everything's okay. It was lovely receiving your email. And then if it's an informal letter, you can just start the second paragraph with basically why the purpose of your letter. So the general structure of writing any letter is the first paragraph is niceties, pleasantries, general phrases. In the second paragraph, you state the purpose of writing your letter. In the third paragraph, you elaborate on this purpose, so you might include some details, or you might ask some questions, and then you finish again with some conclusion, and then niceties and pleasantries. So yeah, I would just say start the first paragraph with general phrases, and then you can go straight into whatever it is that you want to gain from the exchange. Okay. Is it a good idea to write sophisticated phrases and word combinations in essays? Excellent question. So in exams, yes, I tend to advise my students that try and show off as much as possible during exam time. So use as complicated a language and as complicated structures as you can, provided they are appropriate and provided that you're confident you will make mistakes. But in general, letter writing, I would tend to say the students sometimes overdo it. Yeah, because they are so, in a way, obsessed, yes, with trying to show how great their English is, and they write in a way that a native speaker wouldn't write. So I would tell your students that always think about the situation you're writing in. So, for instance, if you're writing an essay for an exam, try to show off all the knowledge that you have. If you're just doing a home task, try and keep it as natural and as sort of native speaker-like as possible. So just tell them to differentiate between the situations. Okay. Too many idioms in an essay. Yes, there is a rule that if you're writing a formal essay, yeah, these mostly are the for and against essays, that you should not use idioms, you should not use collocations, you shouldn't use any slang. So in general, knowledge of slang and idioms shows the level of your English, but again, it is not appropriate for a certain type of writing. Yeah, so tell your students to use, to show off different parts of language where appropriate. Write and improve site. So unfortunately, I have not used this site, but I think we should definitely look into it. Okay, write and improve. Yes, I will definitely check it out. Thank you, Elena. Okay, how to remember phrasal verbs. Yeah, this is a part of writing. What is suggested with phrasal verbs is that never teach them in blocks. What I mean by that is there is a strategy, for example, that you give your student a list of all the phrasal verbs that use of, or a list of all the phrasal verbs that use get. And what happens in the end is that they mix them up. So make sure that you teach them as you would with any other vocabulary, that you mix them up with other words or other phrasal verbs that are different. So what I mean by that is teach them one phrasal verb with get, but then another one should be with pick. Yes, so use different phrasal verbs. Never teach them a set of related set of phrasal verbs related to one particular verb. Yes, and definitely use them in everyday speech. Yeah. Okay, right. Well, we have 6 minutes left, so anything that we haven't discussed, yeah, this is sort of last minute chance. Okay, guys. Well, I think we've had an extremely productive webinar. I thank you very much for your participation. We had, I have to say, wonderful input and a lot of things that we discussed here. I see that some of you use them already in your work, which means that they work. Yeah, you're recommending them to us, so that's amazing. I'm going to send you the link to the Successful Writing series for those of you who haven't used them yet. And also, you will have a recording of this webinar most likely on Monday. It will be ready, so again, it will be emailed to you. I thank you once again for your participation. I have to say, this was my first webinar for such a large group, so I was extremely nervous, but I thank you very much for your participation and for the wonderful comments that you wrote. So I really wish you, from the bottom of my heart, success when teaching writing to your students and when teaching them anything, really. And I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. So thank you very much once again, and hopefully in the future we'll meet again. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.